So one of the things that's come up several times in our discussions is that we need to make sure that our Mac end users get the same level of support and quality of support as their colleagues who are using Windows. And if your admin tools and your support team are already set up to serve your Windows users, what exactly do you need to do to ensure that Macs are appropriately managed and supported? So back in episode 2, Dave Groover mentioned that whether you need new or different tools is an it depends situation. Well, he also pointed out that many Windows IT admins and engineers are actually already Mac users and are passionate about the technology, whether in their work life or in their personal life. So to find out more about it, I've invited along another one of my colleagues, Tom Rice, who's a solutions engineering manager here at SHI, because he and I have talked about some of these problems before. Tom spent his career in IT, early on discovered that his passion was really working with the Apple ecosystem, and he now leads a team at SHI to help our customers select, deploy and manage the right Apple technology for their environment. And this is often in exactly those mixed environments where Windows dominates. So welcome to We Got Your Mac, Tom.
Thank you, Victoria. It's great to be here. But yeah, and exactly what you said.
So you've probably got a lot of good stories out there of the kind of problems people have come across, some of which will have been serious, some of which probably quite funny. Just to give us a bit of background on them, you've said it's across a range of industries and range of sizes. What are the roles people in that you're engaged with? Are you working with the decision makers, or are you working with the people who are actually tasked with the job of actually getting it done rather than deciding to do it?
It depends upon where the ask is coming from. Sometimes we'll get requests from the knowledge workers themselves who haven't brought the request to the company yet and said, I made a decision for my department or my role that I want a Mac, and I have purchasing power, so I want to bring it onto the network. Many times it is with the IT team and who have seen the value of Mac and want to add it to their fleet. And other times it is the decision makers, the executives, the C-suite, who say, we've seen the cost effectiveness of the Mac, we've seen it reduces our support tickets, we've seen our employees be more productive, so we want to expand that footprint. We want to bring it into our environment.
Overall, what do you think the biggest challenges are that people are facing? I mean, I know when I did this, it was a long time ago, so there were concerns about the impact on network traffic because Macs were still using Apple Talk, and Apple Talk was very chatty, so there was a real concern that the 1% of Macs in the environment would suddenly mean that all of the Windows users couldn't do their jobs.
Yeah, and I think that's still a very real concern today. I think if I had to put an overarching statement on it, the thought process from those people, especially those who haven't used Macs or not familiar with them at a technical level, are that Macs are different and they won't work in our network. But Macs are fundamentally using the same technologies that any IT device is going to be using. They connect to the network with the same protocols, they use the same methodologies to print, they run the same software. So the conception that if I bring Macs onto my network, I'll have to change the architecture, or I'll have to put in completely new systems, or this won't work because it only works on this type of platform, is a big hurdle that we struggle with to make sure people understand. And I say struggle, it's just making sure they understand the fact that you're not fundamentally changing things. You're just saying you're bringing a new, device into the network, just as you may switch from a Mazda to a Toyota. You're bringing your device on, and this will work the exact same way that your Mazda worked.
Now, I know that you work with a lot of Mac admins. If you're a Mac admin in a Windows environment, what are the barriers that you come up against, and what kind of problems, other than that we don't want your Macs on our network, because that's fairly generic, what kind of specific barriers are people coming up against when they're actually trying to manage these devices in that Windows environment?
IT doesn't operate in a vacuum, but IT also, to a point, is segmented, right, within different roles. So you have your networking teams, your security teams, your people who are responsible for selecting applications, and many of those people have their own fundamental ideas about how their particular technology should work. And a lot of the barriers I see is like, well, Macs just won't do this. So it's convincing those stakeholders that your Macs will accept, an IP address, to put it simply, or, will connect to the network. Your Macs will run the security tooling that you're running. Your Macs will run the applications that you're deploying. So my advice to people is always make friends with your colleagues in other departments. Get to know your security people, get to know your networking people, and then really talk about what their concerns are, whether it's a Mac can't, deploy a certificate, or a Mac won't be able to connect to your company's networking file shares, and explain to them how that actually works, and that Macs can do this, and Macs are capable of doing it.
And I guess the other thing is, if you're seeing them in person, buy them coffee and donuts, or whatever, because cake always helps, right?
Yes, exactly. Cake is great. Some of the best chats and the best way I've gotten people to work, further on a project, or understand, the Mac point of view, is having chats outside the office.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right there. It's about building the relationships. So, turning it around, you've got Windows admins sometimes who are being asked to integrate Macs into their environment, perhaps even being asked to support those Macs. It's an expansion of their role. Do they have the same concerns as Mac admins, or as they're part of that community already, have they got different issues that they're trying to address?
Yeah, I would say it's somewhat different issues, because as you do diversify your technology stack, there is a little bit of overhead that you have to overcome, whether it's, investment in infrastructure, or knowledge, or understanding different workflows. So there is that hesitancy to really commit and say, well, I'm comfortable with the tooling I have, or I'm comfortable with the workflows that I use. So now I have to do things just a little bit differently for these subset of devices, until the Macs really become a predominant platform in the organization. And you're not doing them for a subset of devices, you're doing them for a majority of the devices. So it's getting those admins, it's adding another tool to the toolbox and learning how to use that tool. So that, just like anybody else would have that hesitancy with, expanding their knowledge or tool base, that's definitely a real thing that has to be overcome.
So are there any resources that you'd recommend to somebody who's being asked to suddenly expand their skill set and start supporting Macs? Is there any way you would send them to find out more about it, and to make sure they've got the skills that they need?
My personal favorite is the Mac admin Slack community. There's an entire workspace of Mac admins. There's about almost 50,000 Mac admins dedicated to talking about the challenges that Mac faces in their environment every day. And that's not organizations that are typically only Mac-centric, or only using Macs. A lot of these organizations are massively hybrid in terms of their deployments, and have dealt with these challenges day in and day out. So not only could they answer your questions or alleviate your fears, but they may already have solutions to the problems that you're actually trying to address. And talk to your vendors too. Vendors are happy to discuss their product and how they can, be useful in your environment.
We've talked about Mac admins, we've talked about Windows admins being asked to take on Macs. When we're talking about deploying Mac at scale, we're talking about trying to get to a point where, maybe not the dominant technology, but we're seeing customers who are 50-50, who are using maybe more than 50% Mac now. So when we're deploying at scale, it's not just a case of you've got half a dozen people in the corner and you can kind of forget about them, and if they moan, it doesn't matter too much, because the overall balance is everybody else is working fine. So again, referring back to my own experience, we had a relatively small proportion of Macs and Mac users in the organization. So the decision was made that we would outsource that support. My job was to liaise between that outsourced support, which therefore wasn't 24/7. It was, I think, 3 afternoons a week or something. And the internal people. But it did mean that first line support for the Mac users was either me or wait until the afternoon, which obviously wasn't a great experience for the end users. When you're looking at scale, how do people make the decision? Do you have a dedicated Mac support team sitting alongside your Windows teams, or do you integrate them so that you've got people with skill sets that work across both? And how do you ensure that you get a consistent level of support and service across all of the platforms that you're supporting, because there may be more than just Mac and Windows, but how do you make sure you get that consistency of support? Because you don't want the Mac user sitting next to the Windows user saying, well, I can't do any work today because the Mac support guy's not in until next Wednesday.
Right, and that's a great question. And I think the answer depends upon the situation the company is in. Some companies can't afford to add staffing. Some companies will outsource their support because they're too globally diverse, especially in 2023 when everybody's remote. It might make it more prudent to outsource to a managed service provider that can provide that 24/7 support, especially if you work across time zones with people working from home. The key takeaway, I think, though, is you don't want to make your Mac users or any other user of a platform that's not your predominant platform feel like a second-class citizen. They should contact whatever level of support you're using, whether it's a managed service provider, whether it's a person who is, comes in for a few hours every day, but is on call, whether it's a dedicated person from your IT team who you decided to going to support Macs, and be able to get the same level of support and resolution for their problems that any other user in your organization would get. So the key takeaway is you don't want to walk up to that support person, one, find that they're not available when other support teams are, and two, have that support person say, well, this is a Mac or this is another device. We don't support that in the organization, because that will never get your users any sort of buy-in to use that particular platform, especially when it comes to Macs. You want to walk up to either make a phone call or Zoom, or walk up to a desk if you're in person and say, I have this problem, and somebody can say, oh, we know what that is, or, we don't know what that is, we can take a look at it, and walk away knowing that you're getting the same level of support that somebody who walked up with a Windows device would get.
Yeah. So really, before you commit to doing this at scale, you've got to have looked at what skills you have in-house and worked out what the optimum way to do it is. You don't want to do the deployment and then think about what the experience is for those poor end users.
Correct. And we actually worked with a large company who was looking to make a very significant Mac deployment. And they had said to us, we're interested in hiring some augmented staff for this initial rollout because our help desk is currently Windows-centric and trained up on that. And while we would love to bring that in-house one day, we want to make sure that during this initial very large-scale rollout, we have dedicated support professionals who are in tune to the Mac, so that people know that as we're bringing Macs into the organization, they can feel supported, their problems will be addressed, and especially as they come upon new situations they may not have encountered before, there are the technical resources there who can address them.
So yeah, that's actually quite a good idea. So you can bring in that expertise to begin with, and then you can do the knowledge transfer over to your own team, including those who won't necessarily be directly supporting the Mac users, but who will be working with the teams that eventually will be, so that you've got everybody comfortable with it before you bring in your own team. That seems like a good approach for a lot of organizations. One of the things that I think may concern people is that adding Mac might mean that you have to add more tools. But you've already mentioned that, some of the existing tools may well have the capability to do this, but there may be cases, I guess, where you do need either an additional tool, or maybe you need to switch to a tool that will support both. So how on earth do people go about working out what the best option is, particularly given the number of tools there are already? That's a hell of a stack of support tools to go through to work out how you're going to create that integrated environment and allow your admins to have visibility of everything, rather than going into 27 different tools to try and find out what's going on.
I think there's two parts to that question. There's the right tool for the right job answer, and there's also looking inside yourself and saying, do I even need this tool set? The first part I think is relatively easy. Certain tools do certain things. And if the tool that you're currently using does not work for all your things that you need to do it for, then it's time to add another tool. I use a simple example of if you're hanging things in your home and you have regular screws and Phillips head screws. Well, clearly you're not going to use the same screwdrivers for both. And if you only have a Phillips head screwdriver, it's time to go out and buy another screwdriver. And to keep it quite simply. And, you'll find that with Mac implementation. There are tools specifically designed to manage Macs to the most, to get the most out of them that just aren't built in existing Windows tool sets. So it's definitely one of those times where it might be time to get another tool. And yes, it isn't adding another tool to your toolbox, but the end results are better. It's you're going to spend hours or days trying to figure out how to cram this tool set into a device that it wasn't designed for, when in reality you could go out and get the tool that you're supposed to use. The other part of that question is more introspective, and I think harder for organizations to answer. You'd mentioned about oh, we have this tool set because this one function 5 people in our company use, and they that's why we bought it. And so you really have to ask the hard question is, well, do those 5 people need it? And is there not another tool that does something maybe not the same, but similar, that is now cross-platform? And that takes a little bit more look in the mirror kind of approach, and kind of hard decisions that have to be made, especially because those 5 people will be upset. Even if you're in a 100,000 person company, you don't want to upset those 5 people who have used this tool their entire lives or careers.
So a tip for an IT admin who's being asked to do this, and a tip for a business user who wants to do this, what are the top things you would tell each of those people?
I think for the business user, obviously it comes down to look at it with an open mind and understand why you're doing it, right? You're not doing it to buy the new shiny thing. You're doing it to be productivity. I mean, perhaps you are, but you're also doing it for things such as ROI, to have your employees be more productive, even to have maybe that shiny thing actually makes your employees happy, and that in turn makes them more productive. And look at it not initially at, there's always that cost benefit analysis that business people love to do. And I think that's a very helpful thing to do. From an IT person, it's not different. People feel different, and it's understandable. I started my career actually purely Windows, and fell into the Mac role because there was no one else to do it, and somebody said, you have to do this. And I was like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And all of these are different. And then you find out all of the things work the same way. Again, it's back to that Toyota Mazda example, right? Maybe the gear shift is a little bit different, or maybe the button for the radio is on a little bit side, but it still has a radio, it still has a transmission. And understand fundamentally that you're not being asked to do something different. You're just using a different device to do the same things.
That's great advice. Well, Tom, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to our audience for listening today.